All right. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Debbie Kerouac, and I am a member of both the Native Plant Society of Texas and also the Texas Master Naturalists. And we started this last year doing some little installments on native plant gardening. So we're going to kind of continue with that spring installment of that idea. And then, as I said to Bethany, please don't hesitate to break in with questions. She can stop me. I've tried to keep this really casual and just kind of think of some things that I'm doing in my garden to get ready for the spring. So these are the basic things that I thought I would cover today, that we are just about at the time to trim. I usually don't do that until about the middle of February, but look at our lovely weather. You know, my plants are already starting to come back. As long as you're trimming, you might want to think about taking advantage of those cuttings that you're making. What do you need to do in terms of weeding? Are you going to think about mulching? And are you putting in any new plants? So those are the basic things that I thought I would cover today. So that's kind of what my backyard looks like right now. I like to leave it like this over the winter because it serves as seed sources for birds and other animals. It's nice places to hide for our wildlife. But now it's time to trim all that stuff back and get started for another year. So one of the things I was thinking about as I started trimming, I actually started doing some trimming a day or so ago, which is a little earlier than I usually do, but I had two reasons for doing that. One is I have guests coming next week, so I wanted to tidy up. The other is, like I said, we've had some beautiful weather and my plants are already greening up. But if you still have some seeds that you've left on the plants from the fall, as you're doing trimming, this is a great time to cast some seeds in some new places. I did that yesterday. I was cutting back a Texas fall aster that had seeded quite a lot, and those seeds don't seem to really dry up for a while. So when I cut it yesterday, I took all those stalks, I took them to a couple places around my property that I wanted some more, and I stomped all over them and just stomped those seeds right into the ground and broke them off of the little stalks. So good time to spread some extra seeds. And of course, you're not going to trim every one of your plants exactly the same. This is my mealy blue sage. So this is what it looked like throughout the winter. And notice it is already greening up. This is one that I trim back pretty thoroughly. So I trim it back all the way down to, this new rosette that's coming up. I know that will grow heartily and do just fine. But again, I don't trim them all the same. So this is an autumn sage. This is what it's been looking like through the winter. And I don't tend to just kind of chop it off. I look through it and I look for some of these stalks that look like they're completely dead. And so I'm a little bit more selective. I cut all those out. I cut off some of these little bits that are extending out the top that look really dead, which looks like I missed a couple. So this is what it looked like after the fact when I trimmed out some of what was getting a little out of control. I may continue to trim a little bit of this some more, just so it stays in a nice shape and doesn't start looking too leggy, because it can do that too. Then I have my beautiful rock rose. I absolutely love, love, love this shrub. This is in my backyard, and this is what it looked like through the winter. And notice that throughout the year, it was getting kind of leggy. It was spreading out across my sidewalk a little bit and out the other side. So when I trimmed it, I pretty much trimmed with my clippers, not carefully like I did the previous one. I just trimmed it off. I got it back off of my sidewalk a little bit from the way it was drooping outside my flower bed, because this is another one that will get real leggy, and I like it to keep that nice shrubby look, a little bit more compact. Now, there's my pile of trimmings that I took off of my rock rose. And this is one that I really like. A lot of other people really like. We're planning to do a plant sale later this spring, so it's nice to have some things that I can add to that. Maybe you'd like to trade with your friends. So these are nice cuttings that already have some nice growth on them. They're alive. And this is a perfect time of year to take advantage of that and pot up some of these cuttings and get yourself some new plants to use. So this is what I did with them. And I'm not trying to promote any particular product. This is just the one I ran across when I was shopping for it. But I do like to use a rooting hormone. It does kind of improve the success rate of your new little cuttings. So there's my pile of cuttings that I selected out of my pile. I did trim the edges. I know these are kind of small and it's hard to see, but I do trim them at a little bit of an angle, just so that there'll be more surface area to take up the hormone. I also trim off some of the leaves, and I'm one that I have a hard time pulling lots of leaves off of things. I probably should even pull more, but you certainly don't want anything that's down in the soil to have leaves on it. They're just going to rot anyway. So I trimmed some of the leaves off. I dip it in this rooting hormone powder, and it gets fairly well covered. So I just kind of tap the excess off as I'm preparing them. And then I just had a couple pots that I had used for something else last year, and they were still sitting there. So I just started sticking my little cuttings into the pots. And I put them off on my patio somewhere where there's very little sun right now. I don't want to stress them too much while they're starting to grow some roots. And if I'm lucky, I may have a dozen new rock roses that I can share with other people. So this is a perfect time of year to do some of that and add to your garden. Now here's one of the fun things about native plants, wildflowers. They are coming back each year, but they do kind of have a mind of their own. So if you already have some established native plants in your garden, expect them to pop up here and there. And if you're one that likes a very tidy looking garden, this might be a perfect time of year to dig some of those up and you know, plant them where you actually want them, because they will kind of wander around. You might even find some in your yard, which again, perfect time to dig them up and add to your garden. It's also a great time of year, of course, as you're cutting everything back and you can see the soil, to get some of the unwanted plants out of your garden. Now for me, again, that's something I wasn't doing a lot of for the first couple years that I really established my native plant garden, because I didn't really know what was what. And I didn't want to take something out that I might want to have there. So as you get more and more familiar with plants that you know you want. Now, obviously, if there's grass coming up in your flower bed and you don't want grass there, that's easy to identify. And you probably find some other things that you don't want. But this is a perfect time of year to get a lot of those unwanted plants out of your flower beds before everything gets really going and you can't see it anymore as easily. That's about all I'm going to say about weeding, though. That's, I, to me, the word weed right from the start is a problematic word, because being a lover of native plants, a weed is a plant you just didn't want there. There are no wildflowers that are called weeds, right? That's our word. Anyway, so take out what you don't want. I also thought this was a perfect time to make mention of the idea of mulching. And, you know, people do mulching for a couple of different reasons. A couple of the big reasons are to maybe discourage some of those plants you don't want from coming up. Another good reason around here is to keep water in the soil, right? Because that's one of our big problems. We get into the summer, it gets really hot, and it's hard to keep your soil damp. You know, it's hard to keep water in that soil. But remember that it's a little bit of a balancing act with the whole mulch thing. If you put too much mulch down and we get a good rain, feel down in there. You might find that once you get down to the soil level, it's still dry. You could have so much mulch on there that the water isn't even getting through. So be careful around your plants that you really need to get water to. I've decided to switch to decomposed granite for my mulch. To me, it looks more natural around here. Wood chips just don't seem to fit, but I know a lot of people like them, and the HOAs really like them. The other thing I would say about wood chip mulch is I know a lot of people really like the ones that have color to them because you get this uniform look around your yard. We found that when we sold our house in Shirts, and our staging lady, she wanted this colored mulch. She liked it. But goodness, you start working with that stuff, and we put down the black mulch and your hands are black. They've used so much dye in that. Ugh. Anyway, but the other thing is mulching trees, because this is a time of year when, you know, I was suggesting in our last meeting, if you happen to be there, that the winter time was a perfect time to put in trees. Now's the time of year when people really start thinking about mulching. But be real careful about putting mulch around trees. I hope everybody knows that this is a huge no-no. And if you notice, I took this straight off the A&M AgriLife Extension website, because they always have some great tips and, you know, do's and don'ts. So this is a huge don't. No mulch volcanoes around your trees. It's going to restrict the oxygen that, by the way, your plants need oxygen as well as you. And it creates a very moist environment right up against that trunk, against the bark, and it can promote it to crack, which is not great for your tree, right? Now you have an entry point for insects and fungi, and softens up that bark and makes it easier for rodents to chew at it. So if you're going to mulch your tree, you know, make sure you're keeping it around the outside more. But again, based on a class I took recently from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, they were making some very good points about mulching, and especially mulching native trees. That the place where this tree, especially a tree of this size, the place where it actually needs mulch is way out here where the roots actually are, sprinkled thin. That whole moat thing, again, is kind of a mistake and not something that really is advisable, especially if it's a really small tree. If you do that moat idea around a small tree, you could promote the roots to grow right into that mound of mulch and not down, which is where you want those roots to grow. So I just wanted to make a couple mentions about ways that you see people doing some mulching that probably doesn't make really good sense. Oh, and I forgot to take that slide out. This is from my previous, so apologies. Let me move on. So the last thing that I had on my list for today was putting in new plants. And these are some pictures that I gathered from around the San Antonio and Austin area, and ways that you might want your property, your flower beds to look. There's a lot of different ways you can approach this. So this is going to be, different for everybody. Everybody's going to have their own thoughts on that. So I just want to give you a few suggestions about that and some resources that you could use to figure out how you might want to choose your plants. First of all, and I've used this slide a number of times, but you might want to think about what your goal is if you're putting in some new plants this year. Are you gardening for birds? Do you want there to be some nesting sites? In other words, do you want some trees that are going to be useful for the birds? Are you looking to supply some food to birds or maybe even butterflies? Do you want nectar plants, host plants for different butterflies? Are you looking to attract hummingbirds? So that's going to change the shape of the flowers that you're looking at. So think about, if you actually have a goal, or if you're just looking for an interesting variety and you don't necessarily have a goal, not a problem either. So on the whole resources side of this, because really, everybody's going to have, like I said, their own approach to this. So I think just having some good resources at your fingertips is probably the best way to go about this. And the Native Plant Society of Texas has a program that we call NICE, Natives Improve and Conserve Environments, NICE. And so you can find information on our website about the NICE program, and I'm going to show you some more information in just a minute. We have nurseries around the area that we partner with that have agreed to supply native plants as much as they can. So here are the ones that are partners with our particular chapter. Each chapter has their own partners. So there's a number of different nurseries around the area that do supply native plants. Believe it or not, Ace Hardware up at Canyon Lake in Sattler has a really nice selection of native plants typically. The place that's closest to me that I go to most often is South Texas Growers out on 46. So just past the HEB and all that shopping right there on 46 heading out to Bernie. Nice thing about South Texas Growers, if you go to their website, she is really good about listing the plants in different categories, trees, shrubs, whatever, perennials, that she has on hand at any particular time. So I like that website a lot. Spring Creek Gardens is a new partner for us, and I have to admit, I haven't been there yet, so I don't know how their inventory is, but if you live up in the Canyon Lake area, it's also a nice place to go check out on 281. And then if you're further north, Wimberley has King Feed that also supplies native plants. So those are some places you can go if you're actually looking for native plants. And then watch our website. Also, we have a Facebook page for our Lindheimer chapter. We will be having a plant sale this spring. It will be only a single day and a little bit smaller because we've always done it in conjunction with Folk Fest in the past, but Folk Fest is moving to October this year, which we hope to be present there as well. Anyway, so we'll be selling some plants at those times. But if you go to the Native Plant Society website, what we put together each year, and all of our partners have this information on hand, but we put out a list of recommended plants for each of the seasons that you would be planting each year. And we try to keep it, try to keep a nice variety. So these are some spring plants that are being recommended for this year, and then we have summer and fall. So that's another nice resource that you can use for suggestions each year. And this actually tells you what that plant might supply if you're looking for it to do something specific for you. These are a couple other resources that I have found useful. This is a very old magazine. I just stuck it on here as a picture. But if you go to gardenstylesa.com through SAWS, they always have some really nice suggestions, and they tend to tell you how those plants could be used if you have particular goals. This is a book that's put out from the city of Austin. Was one of, well, as you can see, it's looking rather old and tattered. That's mine. I've used it quite a lot. It has great suggestions too, and it will tell you if the plant is native or just adapted to this area, which is an acceptable thing to do as well, and what it could provide if you're looking for it to provide something. I have noticed when I went looking for this book several months ago, that you can see the book in its entirety online now. So we were always offering this to people for a small fee at our meetings, but we haven't had meetings in a while. So I was very excited to find out that you can see this book online now if you want to. And I threw together, and this is something that I had used, I think, in my last presentation, some ideas for plants. If you're trying to come up with some ideas and, do something that's a little bit more native, there are some plants, if you have a lot of trees on your property, there are some plants that will do well in shady areas and provide some nice ground cover, maybe in place of the Asiatic jasmine or something like that. So we have the cedar sage, which is so named because it likes to grow under mountain cedars. Tropical sage, this is a prairie verbena, one of my favorites. Columbine and heartleaf skullcap, which mine are just starting to pop up out of the ground again. But those are pretty good for shady areas. So don't feel like, oh, I've got a lot of shade on my property and I'll never be able to grow these native plants that grow out in the full sun. Well, there are a few. Also, if you're looking for something a little bit shrubbier, the Turk's cap grows really well in shady areas, and I've seen it used a lot in neighborhoods. It's a great plant. And there's the rock rose, which that's what mine looks like when it's blooming. Love that thing. And they'll both do well in at least somewhat shady areas. Of course, sunny areas, there's just so many choices. I just threw a couple of my favorites in here. Blackfoot daisy, this guy, oh, so pretty and hardy as can be. So it's a really nice one. If you've got some rocky soil, Blackfoot daisy is a really nice one, and it's not too hard to find at least at South Texas Growers. I have picked it up there. Also this lovely Callilophus, which is a primrose, an evening primrose. Really nice choice for some sunny ground cover, as is this kind of Coreopsis. Now this guy is again, one of my favorites. It looks so delicate, and yet it is one of the hardiest things. I have a variety that comes up in my yard called roadside Gora, and it's just everywhere. It's so happy. But again, lots and lots of ground cover choices. You can go to those different resources and see some of the other choices. These are some others that come up in the spring. I like this guy, green thread. Of course, the cone flowers are usually everywhere pretty soon and pretty easy to plant, especially if you're just getting started. They'll cover an area pretty quickly. And blanket flowers, another nice choice for really sunny areas. If you're looking for something a little shrubbier, these are a couple of my favorites. Damianita, I know you can find this at least at South Texas growers without too much trouble. I got some more last fall that I put in. And here's my Texas fall aster. So that's another one that's really hardy. It's a beautiful shrub, and it will seed pretty prolifically. That's what I just cut down yesterday and spread some more seed. And the Greg's Mist, which that stuff is, pardon my usage, but crack for butterflies. Some of the butterflies are just there, like, you might have a garden full of other plants, but if you've got Greg's Mist, that's where they are. And the lovely blazing star. A couple others that are super easy to grow, good places to start. Anything with the word sage in it, right? Because then you know that at least it's somewhat deer resistant. They don't love it. The mealy blue is a great native that's so easy to cultivate. I put one in, I guess about 2 years ago now, and I think I've got about 3 going right now, and they just keep popping up next to my current ones. The autumn sage, that big salvia gray guy that a lot of people love, also easy to grow. Zexmania, another good easy starter. I don't know how easily I have found it to buy. My yard's so full of it, I would have never even considered buying it, but it is a great easy shrubby plant to grow. And then standing cypress, you have to be a little bit patient with. It's beautiful, but it comes up the first year and then flowers the second year. So that one you have to be a little patient with. Okay. There we go. That's all I had. My goal was to just kind of get you all interested and thinking and see what you all have for questions.
Well, Debbie, we definitely have a lot of questions in the chat. Do you mind if we go there first?
Sure, let's start there.
Okay, do you want to read them and then answer, or do you want me to read them to you?
Now that I've stopped sharing, I can go ahead and do that.
Okay.
Okay. Arbor Vita. Used for privacy. Well, I know that one of the favorites around here that makes a good shrub, and you can use it as a, along your property edge, is what some people call purple sage. It's also called cenizo. I know it can be trimmed just like a hedge. So if you're looking for something hedgy, and it's pretty easy to find. The only thing is that it goes by a lot of different names. And I discovered when I went to buy some at South Texas growers in particular, I had to use the scientific name, because I started asking the staff about purple sage and they were sending me in all different directions. It's called leucophyllum, which in Latin means white leaves. Anyway, so purple sage is a great one that does make a good hedge. And because it's got kind of a fuzzy leaf, the deer aren't too fond of it. Yeah, I have not had the pleasure of going to Plant House. So yeah, that's wonderful to know that that they have some native plants. And sometimes if you just ask, you know, if you can find a staff member that seems to know what they're doing, I would not hesitate to ask. And yes, I know King Feed is coming to Sattler. I think there's some question as to whether they're going to have any plants initially, or if they're just going to be a feed store. But I know that they are opening a second location. So I just love decomposed granite. Somebody's asking about, can you use it in the front garden bed? Well, I used it everywhere. It's in my front garden beds. I just think it looks really natural, but that's the way my property looks. I don't have a standard lawn. I have green stuff that we mow sometimes. So I don't know. To me, I think it looks very natural here as opposed to the wood chips. Privacy screens. Oh, evergreen. So another one that's a really nice choice that you might want to think about is evergreen sumac. I've been playing around with that lately, and it's not a huge shrub. I don't know how it deals with being trimmed like hedge style, but it will grow, I think, pretty quickly, and I think you could probably grow it fairly close together. Bottle brush. I'm not familiar with bottle brush or any other names that it might go by, but I know that evergreen sumac is going to be pretty drought resistant and deer resistant. They don't tend to like the sumacs. And how I tend to water, it depends on the temperature, obviously a little bit, about how often do I water. If it's getting warm like we're having right now, and I just put plants in the ground, I'll probably put at least some water on them every few days for a while until that looks like they are getting started. And yeah, and oh, my cutting, well, hang on, let me, I'll get to that in a second. So I only water every few days or so, and I don't tend to water a lot. My method of watering in most of the places that my home and other places that I help with, is that you water a little bit on each plant, walk away, come back, do a second round, little bit, and when I say a little bit, I'm probably pouring, I don't know, the equivalent of a half a cup to a cup, maybe at a time, not too much. Let it soak in, do it again, instead of just drowning it. And I do keep my cuttings, when I've just started cuttings, I try to keep them pretty evenly damp, not sopping wet, but I try not to let them dry out. I keep them damp for a while. Yes, I love South Texas Growers sales. So if you get on their email list, then they will let you know when they're having their sales. So that's always nice. Oh yeah, wax myrtle can also work. When would you, so I try to get all of my spring planting done before May if I can. Have I ever not done that? Of course. Sometimes I find an opportunity that, oh, somebody has a plant that they want to share some of, or whatever, and I'll break my rule. But I really prefer to get plants in the ground like March, April, when we're going to get some good rain anyway. May can, sometimes we get drowned in May, sometimes it just starts getting really hot. So if I can, I try to get all my planting done kind of early and get it established so that I know I don't have to do a lot of watering in the summer. And I'm kind of on the fence about how much to water throughout the summer too. I feel like some of the plants look like they would much prefer to just be a little bit dormant, and I keep pouring water on them saying, I'd really like to see your flowering. And they're just, please leave me alone. So I try to keep them alive, but I try to keep the watering to a minimum. Remember, you're growing native plants. They shouldn't need a whole lot of your help. Now, having said that, when you just put something in the ground, you're probably going to have to take care of it a little bit more. My trees I take care of for a good year. And my husband, so I mostly trim my salvias right now or sometime in February. I don't trim. You can trim again. Some people do, like during the summer or like early summer, just to keep it in a form that you like. That's kind of your personal preference, but I tend to keep my salvia trimming to this time of year and just take out those branches that look like they're completely dead now, take some tips off, get the shape the way I want it, and then I kind of leave it alone. And I'm still doing a lot of learning here. I've only been on my property for 4 years, so each year I learn a little bit more. My husband came up with an interesting idea for watering our brand new trees. I had him put a bunch of trees in the ground for me during the winter, and he thought, shouldn't you be watering that really down there in the roots? So he took some 3-inch PVC, so some decent sized PVC, made a couple foot lengths and cut off the bottom at an angle and drilled some holes in the bottom so it would deliver water. And we stuck those down in the ground all around the trees that we just put in. And now when I go water them, I take a gallon jug of water and I pour it down the tube, and it goes right down into the ground, right at the root level. Do I know for sure that it's working? I don't know yet, but my trees look pretty good. And I don't lose a lot of water as it runs off. So I don't know. It seemed like a good experiment to try. Oh, I know. There was one other thing I was going to mention. Another thing to keep in mind if you're growing native plants, they may not look like they're doing much when you first plant them. The rule of thumb with native plants, if you haven't heard this one yet, is first year they sleep, second year they creep, third year they leap. So some of them take a little while to really take off. And then when they do take off, they really do. So I'm also kind of a new composter. I've been doing that for just over a year. I compost some of my clippings, although I haven't had really good luck with the really woody parts of clippings. I tend to only compost the softer parts. And what I learned, I actually took a composting class because I was a failure at composting. So I took a class, and what I learned is that you have to make sure you have a good mixture of what they call green and brown. So the green is your live stuff, the really, soft stuff, and your fruit and vegetable scraps and things like that. And then the brown stuff is more dried things and stuff like that. So if you have a variety of that and just kind of layer them one and then the other, seems to work. I've been getting some pretty decent compost out of my pits, and I keep two going. I let one build up until it's a couple feet high or so and decide that that's enough for me to manage. And then I start the one next to it, and I let the one that I just finished sit there for several more weeks, and I keep turning it. And then I've usually been taking about three-gallon bucketfuls out of my compost pit to put around from that. So I hope that helps. 2 Mexican plums. Again, I have one Mexican plum, and it hasn't grown very much yet. I've had it in the ground, I think about 1.5 years or so, and it keeps putting on leaves, and it's coming along, but it's not coming along real quickly. I don't typically put a lot of fertilizer on native plants. That's another thing that they just don't really need. But when I'm starting a new little tree, I do put some plant food in my water. Not all the time, but a couple times a year at least, just to give it a little extra help. But I think you just have to be patient with some of those little trees, and they will come on. It's going to take them a little while. Yes, exactly. It's a exercise in patience with the trees. It really is. So I'm trying to just kind of leave them to their devices. I put cages around them so the deer don't nibble at them and stress them that much more. But just be patient with your trees. Anybody have any other questions? I think, unless I missed one, Mexican orchid tree. I don't see why not, as long as you can get most of that root ball up. If you feel like it would do better in the sun. I mentioned this in my last presentation, but what I've been learning about planting trees is that the hole doesn't have to be any deeper than the root ball that you're pulling up. Do get it about twice as wide as the root ball that you're putting in. And the suggestions now are to fill that hole with water and then put your tree in it, and then, and let that kind of sit for a bit, and then put your soil in. Give it a pretty good watering, and you'll probably have to water it maybe even a couple times a week for a while, just to make sure it takes to that transplanting. But I wouldn't hesitate, if it seems like it's so unhappy where you put it, give it a try somewhere else. Anybody else?
Hey, Debbie, have you ever seen desert willows, how they stand up to deer?
I've not had desert willows where the deer are.
Okay.
I've always, right now I have one, and it's inside my fence. They don't have a real big trunk, so I would fear the fall, the male deer as much as anything. So no, I guess the answer to that is no. I really haven't tried that, and I don't know that I would.
I know. I'm curious. I love how they look, but I'm just worried that it wouldn't be worth the.
Yeah, they're beautiful, and you'd probably have to cage them for at least a couple years. But the blooms would be up high enough in a fairly short time, which is badly. Yeah, I would think you would have to do that you'd have to cage it. But from what I understand about the white-tailed deer around here is that they don't tend to tip their head up and look high for what they're going to nibble at. So once it gets big enough so that most of the leaves, the flowers are a little bit above them, then it'll do better. But yeah, I don't know how those males are going to do with those small trunks. Yeah. Anything else? Lots of different questions. That's awesome. I'm just so excited to be getting outside and working in my garden already. I just hope that means we aren't going to have a super hot summer. But I'm always happy to see my plants start again.
So this is all of our pump up speech now. It's 1 o'clock. Everybody go outside and start working on your yard,
Exactly.
right?
It's a beautiful day. So yeah, I know next week is supposed to be cold. We're supposed to have a couple days that might get below freezing.
Mhm.
Yep, I love my herbs too. Oh, Jerusalem sage. I actually have that. I've been cutting it back a fair bit down, well, down to, I don't know, a foot or maybe a little bit more. Depends on how big you want it to get. Where I put some and I just wanted some dramatic effect in a spot, it got way bigger than I expected. And so I've been trimming it back to make it kind of fit in with where I put it better. And it seems to be fine with that. So I wouldn't hesitate to cut it back. It seems to grow pretty fast. You can probably cut it back down to a foot, maybe even shorter. Um, yeah, I like growing my herbs. I have them in a separate spot though, but and see crepe myrtles. See, I'm not a fan really of crepe myrtles. Desert willow to me is a much nicer plant and really belongs here. Um, and I don't like the way people treat the crepe myrtles around here. I don't know who got the idea that a tree should be trimmed back like it was a shrub. Um, Nobody does that with any other trees. I don't understand why we do that with crepe myrtles. But I've kind of gotten away from crepe myrtles, I have to admit. So I don't know if anybody has luck with them and likes to grow them. But anyway, but yeah, we may be throwing blankets on our brand new plants next week. I'm seeing some pretty low overnight temperatures for a couple nights. So be prepared.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Debbie. That was a
Yeah.
great as always, and a lot of people I know have been chatting about how good it was, and I'm glad you got to see that.
Oh,
So
thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, it has kind of become my passion. I do really enjoy it, and I'm loving watching my property just explode in lovely colors. So thanks for being here. Thanks for joining me.